The blood-red sun dipped low on the horizon as Kieran Miller's weathered boots crunched across the drought-parched dirt of his ranch yard, the day's final light casting long shadows across the Montana territory. It had been 3 years since he'd returned from the war, 3 years of solitude in this remote corner of the frontier, where a man could escape the ghosts that followed him from battlefield to battlefield across the torn nation. He'd almost reached his cabin door when he spotted them, a woman, her face drawn with exhaustion, clutching the hands of 2 small children at his front gate. The year was 1877, and the harsh realities of westward expansion had left many families destitute or worse. Kieran paused, his hand instinctively dropping to the revolver at his hip, a habit born of necessity in these untamed lands. But there was no threat in the trio before him, only desperation etched into the woman's face, visible even from 30 paces. "Please," she called out, her voice cracking with thirst. "We've been traveling for days. Our wagon broke down 10 miles back." Kieran approached cautiously, noting the woman's once fine dress now torn and dusty, her children a boy of perhaps 6 and a girl no more than 4 with hollow cheeks and fearful eyes. The woman herself couldn't have been more than 25, though hardship had aged her beyond her years. "Madam," Kieran said, tipping his hat as he drew closer, "you shouldn't be out here alone. These parts ain't safe for a woman and little ones." "We have nowhere else to go," she replied, standing straighter despite her obvious fatigue. "My husband," her voice faltered. Kieran understood without needing to hear more. Death was a constant companion on the frontier, whether from disease, accident, or violence. Something shifted in Kieran then, a decision made in the space between heartbeats. He pushed open the gate and gestured toward his modest cabin. "Come in," he said simply. "This is your home now." The woman blinked, disbelief momentarily replacing exhaustion on her features. "Sir, we couldn't possibly." "Name's Kieran Miller, and you are Nora Campbell. These are my children, James and Sarah." Kieran nodded, noting how protectively she held the children to her sides. "Well, Mrs. Campbell, night's coming and so is a storm. I've got shelter, food, and clean water. Tomorrow we can figure what's next." The little boy, James, looked up at Kieran with solemn eyes. "Mama says we shouldn't accept charity." Kieran crouched down to the boy's level. "It ain't charity when it's neighbors helping neighbors. That's just the way of things out here." After a moment's hesitation, Nora nodded, her shoulders slumping with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Miller, just for tonight." As Kieran led them toward the cabin, he felt a strange lightness in his chest. His home had stood empty and silent for too long, filled only with memories and regrets. Perhaps these unexpected visitors were exactly what the lonely place needed. Inside, the cabin was simple but solid, one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs, and a small area sectioned off for sleeping. A ladder led to a small loft space above. "It ain't much," Kieran said, suddenly self-conscious of the sparse furnishings. "It's wonderful," Nora replied softly, her eyes taking in the sturdy walls and roof. "We've slept under the stars for 3 nights now." Kieran busied himself with the fire, adding logs until it roared to life. "You and the children can take my bed. I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly, please, Mrs. Campbell. I insist." As the cabin warmed, Kieran heated a pot of beans and bacon, adding the last of his sourdough bread. The children ate ravenously, while Nora took small, measured bites, her eyes constantly moving between her children and their benefactor. Later, after the children had fallen asleep in his bed, Nora sat with Kieran by the fire, her hands cradling a cup of coffee. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. "Fever took him. We were heading to Oregon, where his brother has land. Long journey for a woman alone. I had no choice. Our farm in Kansas failed after 3 years of drought. The bank took everything." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "We were doing well until our wagon axle broke yesterday. I tried to fix it, but she shook her head." "We'll retrieve what we can tomorrow," Kieran said. "There's a settlement about 20 miles west Timber Creek. Got a general store, blacksmith. Might find work there if you're still set on Oregon." Nora's eyes met his, steady and clear despite her exhaustion. "Why are you helping us, Mr. Miller?" Kieran stared into the flames, considering his answer. War showed me the worst of humanity. Reckon I've been looking for the best ever since." They sat in companionable silence until Nora's head began to nod with fatigue. Kieran insisted she join her children in the bed, and he made himself comfortable on a bedroll near the fire, listening to the soft breathing of his unexpected guests. Morning came with pale golden light streaming through the cabin's single window. Kieran woke to find Nora already up, her hair neatly braided, attempting to cook breakfast with his meager supplies. "You needn't have done that," he said, rising quickly. "It's the least I can do," she replied, turning cornmeal in his cast iron skillet. "I hope you don't mind. The children will be hungry when they wake." Outside, Kieran pumped fresh water and washed his face, trying to gather his thoughts. In the 3 years since establishing his ranch, he'd kept largely to himself, trading at Timber Creek only when necessary, avoiding entanglements with the scattered neighbors. Now, with a woman and 2 children under his roof, the careful isolation he'd built was suddenly threatened. Yet as he watched Nora move efficiently around his kitchen, setting his table with his mismatched plates, something long dormant stirred within him. Perhaps this disruption was exactly what he needed. After breakfast, Kieran hitched his 2 horses to his wagon. "We'll salvage what we can from your wagon, Mrs. Campbell, then we need to decide what's next for you and the children." "Call me Nora, please," she said. "And I'm afraid I don't have many options, Mr. Miller." "Kieran," he corrected. "And there are always options out here. That's why folks come west." The journey to Nora's abandoned wagon took over an hour. When they arrived, Kieran saw immediately that the axle was beyond repair. Wolves or coyotes had been at the supplies left behind, but several trunks remained intact. With Nora directing, they loaded her remaining possessions into Kieran's wagon. "These were my mother's," Nora explained, carefully wrapping a set of china plates in a quilt. "The only things of value I have left." Kieran nodded, understanding the importance of keepsakes in a land where everything else could be lost so easily. As they worked, the children explored the area under Nora's watchful eye, collecting wildflowers and interesting rocks. "You're good with them," Kieran observed as Nora patiently answered James's endless questions about a beetle he'd found. A sad smile touched her lips. Their father was better. He always knew how to make them laugh, even when times were hard. By midday, they had salvaged everything of value and were heading back to the ranch. James sat up front with Kieran, his small face serious as he watched the cowboy handle the reins. "Were you a soldier, mister?" the boy asked suddenly. Kieran glanced down in surprise. "What makes you ask that?" "You stand like my pa did. He was in the war." "Yes, I was a soldier," Kieran admitted. "A long time ago. My pa said being a soldier made him sad sometimes." Kieran felt a lump form in his throat. "Your pa was a wise man." Back at the ranch, Kieran helped Nora unload her belongings into the cabin. The space immediately felt different, her quilt draped over the back of his chair, her books stacked on his table, her children's laughter echoing off the walls. That evening, after the children were asleep, Kieran broached the subject they'd been avoiding all day. "Winter's coming in a few months," he said. "Oregon's a hard journey even in good weather, with no wagon and 2 small ones." He let the words hang between them. Nora sat very still, the firelight playing across her features. "What are you suggesting, Kieran?" "Stay here, at least until spring." The words rushed out before he could reconsider. "I've got the space and I could use the help around the ranch." The children would be safe, with a roof over their heads and food in their bellies. "I can't accept charity for months on end," Nora protested. "It ain't charity. You can cook, keep the cabin in order. I've let things slide since I've been alone." He gestured around the Spartan room. "And the children?" "Well, a place needs children to feel right." Nora studied him carefully. "You're a kind man, Kieran Miller." "No, madam, just practical. Winter's coming, and nobody should face it alone out here." The next morning, Kieran rode into Timber Creek for supplies, returning with flour, sugar, coffee, and fabric for Nora to make clothes for the children. He also brought back news the stagecoach had been robbed 20 miles south, and Indians had attacked a homestead to the north. The frontier was growing more dangerous by the day. Days turned into weeks as summer waned. Kieran taught James to fish in the creek that ran through his property, while Nora planted a small garden with seeds Kieran had never bothered to use. Little Sarah followed Kieran everywhere, chattering about the chickens he kept or the wildflowers growing alongside the cabin. Each night, Kieran slept on his bedroll by the fire, while Nora and the children took his bed. Though it wasn't ideal, none of them complained. One evening in late August, Kieran returned from checking his cattle to find Nora sitting on the porch, mending one of his shirts. The setting sun bathed her in golden light, and for a moment, he allowed himself to imagine this was truly her home, that the domestic scene before him wasn't temporary. "Where are the children?" he asked, removing his hat. "Asleep already. They spent the day helping me with the washing. They're exhausted." She smiled, setting aside her sewing. "James says he wants to be a rancher like you when he grows up." Kieran felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. "Boy's got a good head on his shoulders. Quick learner, too." "He adores you," Nora said softly. "They both do." Kieran sat beside her on the porch step, careful to maintain a proper distance. "They're good children. You've raised them well. Their father deserves much of the credit. William was a wonderful father." Her voice caught slightly on her late husband's name. "Tell me about him," Kieran said. In the weeks they'd been together, Nora had rarely spoken of her husband. Nora's hands twisted in her lap. "We met before the war. He was apprenticed to my father, who was a carpenter. When the war came, he joined up with the Union, came back different like so many did." She glanced at Kieran. "I imagine you understand that." Kieran nodded, memories of blood-soaked fields threatening to surface. "War changes a man. William tried so hard to forget, to be the man he was before. We moved west hoping for a fresh start. He worked from sunrise to sunset building our farm." She blinked rapidly. "The drought came, then the fever. He fought so hard to live for the children's sake." "He sounds like a good man." He was. Nora looked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "What about you, Kieran? You've never spoken of your family." Kieran was silent for a long moment. "Not much to tell. Parents died when I was young, raised by my uncle in Missouri. Joined up with the Union when the war broke out. Afterward, couldn't stomach going back east. Too many memories. Came west, worked cattle drives until I saved enough for this place." He shrugged. "Been here 3 years now, alone all that time." "Alone suits me," he said, then immediately regretted the words when he saw the hurt flash across her face. Or it did, before. September brought the first hint of autumn chill. Kieran spent long days preparing the ranch for winter, chopping firewood, smoking meat, repairing the roof and walls of the cabin. Nora worked alongside him, her capable hands never idle. Together they created a root cellar beneath the cabin floor, storing potatoes, carrots, and apples for the cold months ahead. One crisp morning, Kieran announced he needed to ride into Timber Creek. "Winter supplies," he explained. "We're running low on flour and sugar." "Might be the last chance before the snow flies." Nora nodded, handing him a list she'd prepared. "If there's fabric to be had, the children need warmer clothes." "I'll see what Mrs. Henderson at the general store has available," Kieran promised, folding the list carefully into his pocket. As he prepared to leave, little Sarah ran to him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "Bring me a sweet, Kieran, please." Kieran's heart melted at the child's innocent request. He crouched down to her level. "I'll bring you the best sweet in the whole store, princess." James approached more solemnly, extending his hand as he'd seen men do. "Safe travels, sir." Kieran shook the boy's hand, impressed by his mature gesture. "I'm counting on you to watch over your ma and sister while I'm gone." "I will," James promised earnestly. As Kieran mounted his horse, Nora stood on the porch, her arms crossed against the morning chill. "Be careful," she called. "There's been talk of trouble in these parts." "I'll be back before dark," Kieran assured her, tipping his hat before riding off. Timber Creek was bustling when Kieran arrived. A stagecoach had just pulled in, bringing mail and passengers from the east. Kieran tied his horse outside the general store and entered, nodding to familiar faces as he made his way to the counter. "Mrs. Henderson," he greeted the proprietor, a widow who had run the store since her husband's death 5 years earlier. "I need winter supplies." Martha Henderson's eyebrows rose. Twice in 1 month, Kieran Miller must be the end of days. Kieran smiled ruefully. He was known for his infrequent appearances in town. Got more mouths to feed these days. Mrs. Henderson's eyes sharpened with interest. So the rumors are true. You've taken in a widow and her young ones. News traveled fast in small communities. Just helping folks in need, Mrs. Henderson. Nothing more to it. Of course, she replied, though her knowing smile suggested otherwise. Now, what supplies do you need? As Kieran reviewed Nora's list, the store's door opened, admitting a well-dressed man Kieran didn't recognize. Tall and imperious, with a neatly trimmed beard and expensive boots, the stranger scanned the store with calculating eyes before approaching the counter. I'm looking for information about a woman and 2 children, he announced without preamble. Traveling west, likely passed through in the last month or so. The woman's name is Nora Campbell. Kieran froze, his hand tightening on Nora's list. Mrs. Henderson's friendly demeanor cooled. And who might be asking? The man straightened, clearly offended by her tone. Nathan Blackwood, attorney at law from Kansas City. I represent the interests of William Campbell's brother, Thomas. Upon William's death, Thomas became the legal guardian of his niece and nephew. Kieran turned slowly to face the attorney. What business does Thomas Campbell have with the children? Blackwood assessed Kieran with sharp eyes. And you are? Kieran Miller, local rancher. Well, Mr. Miller, my client wishes to fulfill his brotherly duty by taking the children into his home. He has the means to provide them with education and opportunities they couldn't possibly receive in these primitive conditions. Kieran felt a surge of protectiveness. Does Mrs. Campbell know about this arrangement? The matter was decided by the courts in Kansas City, Blackwood replied dismissively. If you have information regarding their whereabouts, I insist you share it immediately. Mrs. Henderson interjected before Kieran could respond. No woman and children fitting that description have passed through Timber Creek, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps they took another route west. The attorney's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but he merely nodded. I shall continue my inquiries elsewhere. Should you hear anything, I'm staying at the hotel. After Blackwood departed, Mrs. Henderson turned to Kieran. That woman you're sheltering, she's running from something, isn't she? Kieran shook his head. Not running, protecting her children, there's a difference. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. I'll gather your supplies, Kieran. You'd best get back to your ranch before that man starts asking more questions around town. An hour later, Kieran was riding hard toward home, his saddlebags heavy with supplies. His mind raced with concern. Nora had never mentioned her brother-in-law claiming guardianship of her children. What else might she be hiding? As the ranch came into view, Kieran saw Nora hanging laundry, the children playing nearby. The domestic scene struck him powerfully. This was what he was fighting to protect, though he had no legal right to do so. Nora smiled as he dismounted, but her expression quickly changed when she saw his grave face. What's wrong? Inside, Kieran said quietly, not wanting the children to overhear. Once in the cabin, Kieran related his encounter with Nathan Blackwood. As he spoke, Nora's face drained of color. Thomas cannot have my children, she whispered fiercely when Kieran finished. William never would have wanted it. Why would the courts grant him guardianship? Nora sank into a chair, her hands trembling. Thomas owns the bank that foreclosed on our farm. He offered to cancel the debt if I would allow him to raise the children. When I refused, he took me to court, claiming I was an unfit mother, too grief-stricken to properly care for them. And the court believed him. Thomas has influence in Kansas City. Money buys justice in such places. She looked up, her eyes desperate. I had to leave. I couldn't let him take them. Why does he want them so badly? Is it just to hurt you? Nora shook her head. Thomas and his wife have no children of their own. He always resented William for having a family when he couldn't. And she hesitated. William left a parcel of land to the children in his will, land with coal deposits. Thomas wants control of it until they come of age. So it's about money, Kieran said grimly. It usually is. We need to leave, Nora said, rising. Tonight. If this lawyer found Timber Creek, he'll find your ranch next. Kieran caught her arms gently. Running isn't the answer, Nora. Winter's coming. Where would you go? I don't know, she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. But I can't let him take my children. And he won't, Kieran promised. But we need to be smart about this. Blackwood doesn't know you're here yet. We have time to think. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Kieran and Nora sat by the fire, speaking in hushed tones. "There's only one permanent solution I can think of," Kieran said hesitantly. "But I'm not sure you'll like it. At this point, I'd consider anything to keep my children safe." Kieran took a deep breath. "Marry me," Nora's eyes widened. "What? If you're a married woman with a husband to provide for you and the children, the court might reconsider Thomas's guardianship. At the very least, it would force a new hearing. Kieran, we barely know each other. I know you're a good mother. I know you work hard and care deeply for your children. I know I've come to care for all three of you more than I thought possible." He looked away, embarrassed by the admission. It wouldn't have to be a real marriage, just on paper for legal protection. Nora was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "And if Thomas challenges it, claims we married only to circumvent the court's decision, then we'll fight him together. I'm not without resources, Nora. I may not be wealthy like Thomas, but I have this land, my cattle. We could build a good life here." "You're asking me to tie your life to our troubles," Nora said softly. "I can't ask that of you. You didn't ask, I offered." Kieran reached across the space between them, taking her hand. "Think about it. That's all I'm saying." The next morning, Kieran rose early and went about his chores, giving Nora space to consider his proposal. By midday, he was repairing a fence line when he spotted a rider approaching from the direction of Timber Creek. His hand dropped to his gun as he recognized Nathan Blackwood. Kieran walked to meet the attorney, positioning himself between the rider and the cabin where Nora and the children remained unaware of the visitor. "Mr. Miller," Blackwood called as he reined his horse to a stop. "I believe you've been less than forthcoming with me." "State your business and be on your way," Kieran replied coldly. "Several people in town mentioned you've taken in a woman and 2 children. Given your reaction in the store yesterday, I suspect they are the very people I seek." Blackwood's tone was triumphant. "I demand to see Mrs. Campbell immediately." "This is private property, Mr. Blackwood. You weren't invited." The attorney's face hardened. "I have legal documents granting my client guardianship of those children. Interfering with a court order is a serious offense, Mr. Miller." "Your court order isn't worth the paper it's written on out here," Kieran replied evenly. "This is Montana territory, not Kansas City. The law is the law, regardless of location. The law also says a mother has rights to her own children." Their standoff was interrupted by the cabin door opening. Nora emerged, her spine straight and her head high, with James and Sarah close behind her. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steady despite the fear Kieran could see in her eyes. "I suspected Thomas would send someone after us." Blackwood dismounted, straightening his jacket. "Mrs. Campbell, you've led us on quite a chase. Your brother-in-law is most distressed by your disappearance with the children." "I'm sure he is," Nora replied coldly. "His concern has nothing to do with their welfare and everything to do with controlling their inheritance. The courts have ruled, Mrs. Campbell, the children are to be remanded to Thomas Campbell's custody immediately." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. "I have the order here." Kieran stepped between them. "The situation has changed since that order was issued." Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "Oh, how so?" "Mrs. Campbell and I are to be married," Kieran stated firmly. Today, Nora's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of her surprise. To her credit, she quickly composed herself. "Yes, that's right. Mr. Miller has asked for my hand and I've accepted." "A convenient arrangement," Blackwood scoffed. "The court will see through such an obvious ploy." "There's nothing for the court to see," Kieran countered. "A widow remarrying to provide stability for her children is hardly unusual." "I will contest this marriage," Blackwood threatened. "You're welcome to try," Kieran replied. "But I suggest you return to Kansas City and inform Thomas Campbell that his niece and nephew are well provided for. They have a home, a mother who loves them, and now a stepfather who will protect them with his life if necessary." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Blackwood glanced from Kieran's resolute face to Nora's determined stance, then to the children watching wide-eyed from behind their mother's skirts. "This isn't over," he said finally, refolding the document and returning it to his pocket. "Mr. Campbell will not abandon his rights so easily." "Neither will I," Nora replied. Tell Thomas that if he truly cared for his brother, he would honor William's greatest wish that his children remain with their mother. After Blackwood departed, Nora turned to Kieran, her eyes questioning. Did you mean it, about marrying today? If you'll have me, Kieran answered simply. Blackwood will be back, probably with reinforcements. We need to act quickly. But a marriage of convenience, it doesn't have to be, Kieran interrupted softly. Not if you don't want it to be. Nora's cheeks flushed. Kieran, Ma. James tugged at her skirt. Are you really going to marry Kieran? Will he be our new pa? Nora knelt to her son's level. Would that be all right with you, James? The boy considered this seriously. Does that mean we get to stay here, with the horses and the chickens? Yes, Nora smiled. It would mean this becomes our home permanently. Then I think it's a good idea, James declared. Kieran already teaches me things like Pa used to. Sarah, not to be left out, added her opinion. I want Kieran to be my papa too. He gives the best piggyback rides. Nora stood, meeting Kieran's gaze over her children's heads. It seems the children approve. And you? Kieran asked, his heart pounding. I think. Nora took a deep breath. I think I would be honored to be your wife, Kieran Miller, though I never expected to marry again so soon. Nor I at all, Kieran admitted. But some things are meant to be, perhaps. That afternoon, they rode into Timber Creek together, the children freshly scrubbed and dressed in their best clothes. At the small church at the edge of town, they found Reverend Thompson, who agreed to perform the ceremony immediately. Mrs. Henderson from the general store and her daughter served as witnesses. As Kieran and Nora exchanged simple vows, James stood proudly beside Kieran while Sarah clutched a bouquet of wildflowers Kieran had hastily gathered on the ride to town. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Thompson declared. You may kiss your bride. Kieran hesitated, suddenly unsure. This was supposed to be a marriage of convenience, after all. But Nora stepped forward, rising on her toes to press a gentle kiss to his lips. The brief contact sent warmth coursing through Kieran's body, and he had to resist the urge to pull her closer. Congratulations, Mrs. Henderson said, beaming as she hugged Nora. In a whisper meant only for the bride, she added, a wise decision, my dear. That attorney left town in quite a huff this morning. He'll be back, Kieran said grimly, or others will come in his place. Let them come, Nora replied, a new confidence in her voice. We'll face them together. Back at the ranch, their ranch now, Kieran carried Sarah on his shoulders as they approached the cabin. At the gate, he paused, looking at Nora. Seems only right, he said, handing Sarah to her mother before sweeping Nora into his arms. She gave a startled laugh as he carried her across the threshold and into their home. That evening, after a celebratory supper that included a special cake Mrs. Henderson had insisted on sending home with them, the reality of their new arrangement began to sink in. As the children prepared for bed, Kieran and Nora exchanged awkward glances. I can still sleep by the fire, Kieran offered quietly. Nothing has to change yet. Nora touched his arm gently. Everything has already changed, Kieran, but we can take things slowly. We have time to adjust to one another. That night, they shared the bed for the first time, a respectful distance between them as they lay in the darkness, listening to the children's soft breathing from the loft above where Kieran had constructed small beds. Thank you, Nora whispered, for everything you've done for us. Kieran turned toward her, barely able to make out her profile in the dim light. I should be thanking you. This place was just a house before. You've made it a home. In the days that followed, they settled into a routine as husband and wife, working side by side to prepare for winter. Kieran taught Nora how to handle a rifle just in case, he explained while she introduced comforts to the cabin he had never considered. Curtains at the windows, a braided rug by the hearth, flowers on the table even as autumn progressed. October brought the first snowfall, earlier than usual. As white flakes drifted past the windows, the family gathered around the fire, Kieran whittling a toy horse for James while Nora read aloud from one of her precious books. Sarah dozed in Kieran's lap, her small hand curled trustingly around his finger. Looking at the scene, Kieran was struck by how complete his life felt now. The emptiness that had haunted him since the war had been filled by these three people who had appeared at his gate just months ago. As winter deepened, the ranch became isolated by heavy snowfall. Days were spent on necessary chores and long evenings by the fire. Kieran began teaching James his letters, supplementing what Nora had already taught him. Sarah insisted on helping with everything, her cheerful chatter filling the cabin from dawn to dusk. The close quarters accelerated the growing intimacy between Kieran and Nora. Each day, the careful distance they maintained diminished. A touch when passing the coffee pot, fingers brushing while folding laundry, a hand at the small of her back as they moved around the kitchen's small contacts that sent currents of awareness through both of them. One night in early December, after the children were asleep, Nora sat beside Kieran on their bed, unpinning her long hair. Kieran watched, mesmerized, as the dark waves fell around her shoulders. "You're beautiful," he said softly, the words escaping before he could stop them. Nora's hands stilled, her eyes meeting his in the lamplight. "Kieran," he reached out, touching a strand of her hair. "I know this began as an arrangement, Nora, but my feelings for you are real. I think they have been since I first saw you at my gate." "I've been afraid," she admitted, her voice barely audible, "afraid to love again, to risk that pain." "I understand fear," Kieran said. "I lived with it for years, but I'm more afraid of not telling you how I feel, of letting this chance pass." Nora moved closer, her hand coming to rest against his cheek. "William will always be part of me, part of the children, but my heart has room for you too, Kieran. It has for some time now." Their first real kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened as months of restrained emotions broke free. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. "Are you sure?" Kieran asked, searching her eyes. In answer, Nora reached for the lamp, turning down the flame until darkness enveloped them. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Kieran woke first, savoring the warm weight of Nora curled against him, her head on his chest. In the weeks since they had truly become husband and wife, each day had brought new discoveries, new intimacies, new reasons to be grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. Upstairs, the patter of small feet signaled the children were awake. Kieran pressed a kiss to Nora's forehead. "Merry Christmas, wife," she smiled sleepily. "Merry Christmas, husband." They had prepared simple gifts, a wooden horse for James, a rag doll for Sarah that Nora had secretly sewn in the evenings. For Nora, Kieran had traded a fine calf to a passing tinker for a silver locket. And Nora had surprised him with a new hat, ordered from a catalog and hidden until this morning. But the greatest gift came after breakfast, as they sat by the fire opening their presents. Nora took Kieran's hand, placing it gently on her stomach. "I have one more gift," she whispered. "One will have to wait until summer to meet." Kieran's eyes widened as understanding dawned. We're going to have a baby," she confirmed, her eyes shining. "Our baby." James and Sarah, catching on to the excitement, crowded around them with questions. "A baby brother or sister?" James asked, his expression serious. "When will it get here?" "Sometime in July," Nora explained, "and we won't know if it's a brother or sister until then." "I want a sister," Sarah declared firmly. "Brothers are too noisy," Kieran laughed, gathering all three of them into his arms. "Whatever God sends us will be perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like the family he's already given me." Winter passed slowly, the deep snow keeping them isolated until March. As the thaw began, Kieran rode into Timber Creek for supplies and news, returning with letters that had accumulated over the winter months. Among them was a formal document from Kansas City. "It's from Thomas," Nora said, her hands trembling as she opened it. Kieran stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders as she read. He's withdrawing his petition for guardianship, says he wishes us well in our new life." "Do you believe him?" Kieran asked skeptically. Nora reread the letter. "There's something else here. He says William's land has been sold, and he's forwarding the children's portion of the inheritance to us. He'll maintain it in trust until they come of age. What changed his mind, I wonder?" "He mentions his wife is expecting their first child." Nora looked up at Kieran. "Perhaps impending fatherhood has softened his heart, or perhaps he simply decided pursuing us wasn't worth the trouble any longer." "Whatever the reason, it's good news," Kieran said, relieved. "One less worry as we prepare for our own new arrival." Spring brought renewal to the ranch. Green grass replaced snow, Wildflowers dotted the meadows, and new calves frolicked alongside their mothers. Kieran expanded the vegetable garden, built a larger chicken coop, and added a room to the cabin for the growing family. Nora blossomed with her pregnancy, her face glowing, her body softening and rounding. Kieran found himself constantly drawn to her, marveling at the miracle they had created together. In late April, they received visitors, a family heading west in a wagon train that had camped nearby. Kieran invited them to dinner, and the cabin filled with conversation and laughter. As the guests prepared to leave, the woman drew Nora aside. "You found happiness here," she observed. "It shows in your face." "Yes," Nora agreed, watching Kieran help the visitors' children onto their wagon. "I never expected to find love again, especially not so soon after losing my first husband, but life has a way of surprising us. The best surprises often come after the hardest trials," the woman replied sagely. "Safe travels to you and your family." As May turned to June, the heat grew oppressive. Nora's pregnancy became increasingly uncomfortable, her movements slowing as her belly expanded. Kieran took over more of her chores, insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day. One sweltering afternoon, Kieran returned from checking the herd to find James waiting anxiously at the gate. "Ma's not feeling well," the boy reported. "She said to fetch you quick." Kieran's heart raced as he rushed to the cabin. Inside, he found Nora lying on their bed, her face pale with pain. "The baby," she gasped. "It's coming. Too early." Panic gripped Kieran. "I'll ride for the doctor in Timber Creek." "No time," Nora panted, gripping his hand. "This baby isn't waiting." For the next 12 hours, Kieran experienced terror unlike anything he'd known on the battlefield. He sent the children to stay with their closest neighbor, then returned to help Nora through her labor. Following her instructions and drawing on his experience birthing calves, he did his best to comfort and assist her. Just before dawn, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Kieran's eyes. "He's perfect," Kieran whispered, placing the swaddled infant in Nora's arms, strong like his mother. "William Kieran Miller," Nora said softly, "to honor the past and celebrate the future." Kieran pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Nora Miller, more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her exhausted face radiant. "Thank you for opening your gate that day, for saying the words that changed our lives forever." "Come in," he repeated, remembering. "This is your home now." "The best words I ever heard," Nora murmured, cradling their son between them, "because they were true." In the years that followed, the Miller ranch prospered. Kieran and Nora added 2 more children to their family, twin girls born 3 years after William. James grew into a fine young man who eventually took over much of the ranch management, while Sarah developed a talent for teaching, starting a small school for neighboring children in a building Kieran constructed near the main house. One evening, nearly 10 years after Nora and her children had first appeared at his gate, Kieran sat on the porch watching the sunset. The ranch had expanded, with more cattle, better buildings, and even hired hands to help with the work. Timber Creek had grown into a proper town, with a railroad station promising further prosperity. Nora joined him, her hand slipping naturally into his. At 40, she was more beautiful to him than ever, laugh lines around her eyes testifying to a decade of happiness. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "Just thinking about how different my life would be if you hadn't appeared at my gate that day," Kieran replied, squeezing her hand. "I was so alone then, so lost. We saved each other," Nora said softly. "You gave us shelter when we needed it most, and we gave you a family to love." From inside the house came the sounds of children's laughter, dishes being cleared, life being lived fully. Kieran stood, drawing Nora to her feet and into his arms. "Come inside, Mrs. Miller," he said, echoing words spoken long ago. "This is your home now." "Always," Nora replied, rising on her toes to kiss him as the last rays of sunlight gilded their beloved ranch in gold. "Always and forever."